Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
And I'm here too, Michelle.
Thank you both for joining us.
And I am here and we are ready to go live whenever you're ready to start the meeting.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
Good afternoon. And
Good
Robert,
afternoon, Michelle. It's Mary Lynn.
Mary Lynn,
Okay, you are live.
well, good afternoon, Citizens Advisory Committee. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It does look like we might have last meeting's agenda that's showing. Robert, would you be able to open the current agenda, please? Perfect. Thank you very much. We do have a quorum present of our Citizens Advisory Committee members, and so if one of our attending members would like to call the meeting to order, please.
This is Ray Connolly. I move that we open the agenda or open the meeting.
This is Patty Beltram, I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We officially have opened the meeting. A couple of housekeeping items for our virtual format. When you're not speaking, if you would please keep your microphone muted. I would also like to acknowledge that we have two of our governing board members attending the meeting today, Mrs. Underhill and Mrs. Belhar Martinez. We also have two guests who are joining us today, Mr. John Gay, our Chief Technology and Strategic Planning Officer, as well as Mr. Mike Trigaboff, who is our Director of, is it Network Systems, Mike?
Yes, it's network operations. Close. That's
Operations. Great. Thank you for that correction. And they'll be presenting later in the agenda. But with that, if we could move to agenda item number 2, please, which is the review and approval of our April 15th meeting agenda, or excuse me, meeting minutes rather. Thank you.
Mrs. Myers.
Yes.
Hi, this is Jason Reynolds, just introducing myself to everyone. I do believe we have 3, it looks to me like we have 3 governing board members. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. I believe maybe Mr. Sandoval is on the call as well.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. When I looked at the attendee list, I did not see Mr. Sandoval, so my apologies. So I should recognize our board president is also in attendance, as well as our deputy superintendent. Thank you, Dr. Reynolds.
And I'll only be on for a short time, but I did want to make sure we just got that. Thank you for that correction.
Thank you.
Michelle, this is Patty Beltram. I move to approve the minutes as typed.
Mrs. Myers, this is Melissa Briggs. I have a question.
Thank you, Mrs. Briggs.
Were these minutes sent out to the committee? Because I did not receive any files or PDFs or minutes.
Thank you. This afternoon, digital copies were sent to the committee. You should have that in your email, as well as copies will be posted on the district's website. Those documents were finalized today, so they just were made available today.
Can I, this is Melissa still, can I request that they be resent to me? Because I sent out 3 emails requesting, saying I hadn't received anything yet and I didn't hear back.
We will re-forward that to you. You should have received the communication, but we can certainly resend that, and I can do that at this moment.
Thank you.
All of the other members received their email.
Yes, I received mine.
Is there a second for the motion?
I could use more time.
Mrs. Briggs, I resent the files to you if you'd like to open it to review the minutes. And then at that point, if the committee feels comfortable to make a second, we can do that.
Michelle, this is Mary Lynn McCord, and I didn't receive the minutes from last meeting either.
You did not receive the email this afternoon?
I just checked it on my phone and I didn't.
Okay, so we can certainly table this agenda item and bring the minutes back at our next meeting, which would certainly allow the group additional time to read through them.
Thank you.
Who did not receive the email and will resend it? Mrs. McCord as well as Mrs. Briggs. Anyone else?
So Michelle, this is Patty Beltram. Then I will move to table the consideration of minutes until our next meeting.
Second.
Michelle, it's Jen, I second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the motion to table the minutes has passed. And also as a housekeeping item for Marcy Watson, who is taking notes for our virtual meeting, when team members speak, if you could please say your name to help her capture comments accurately in our minutes. And so if we refer to our agenda again, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a request from our last meeting to give the committee the opportunity to modify or add additional meetings to the previously published schedule. And we do have the ability, if the committee would like to make the recommendation, to add a meeting for next week, next Wednesday, which is April 29th.
Michelle, this is Annette McCarty. I move that we add an additional meeting next Wednesday, April 29th. And if I may, inquire if we could add one for, we'll probably have one scheduled the following week. If we could add one for the week after that too, I think we're going to need it.
I second. This is Patty.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second to add an additional Citizens Advisory Committee meeting on April 29th, which is next Wednesday as well as Wednesday, May 6th. Is that correct?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposition, opposed? Okay, thank you. The motion carries. So we have added those 2 meetings to the schedule. At this time, I would assume they will continue to be in a virtual format. If there is a change to the format, we will certainly let you know. And now we can move on to agenda item number 4, which is the fiscal 2021 State of Arizona budget update. There's not a handout for this update. I will provide it verbally. Last time we met, there was a question if there could be updated information provided to the Citizens Advisory Committee regarding the state's budget and economic impacts related to COVID-19 and information that we're receiving related to funding and other considerations. And I can share with our committee, and this information also has been presented to our governing board, that the state of Arizona did pass a base support level budget that has been known as a skinny budget, which basically guaranteed the 20 by 2020 funding for school districts, the inflation funding, and restricted capital funding to 1 year of restoration versus 2. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, the state was looking at providing 2 years of restoration funding next year versus 1. So that's a reduction of about $2.8 million for the district. That is being reviewed in conjunction with an economic forecast that's just come out from the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. This information was published on April 9th, and the state right now, based on severe shortfalls that are being projected for sales tax revenue, is identifying a $1.1 billion shortfall as a whole for fiscal year 2021. They have the caveat that that projection can go $500 million either way, meaning it could be $500 million more than $1.1 billion or $500 million less. So that's something that we're very aware of. I'll be providing an update tomorrow night at the governing board meeting as well, related to the legislature publicizing that they are going to officially sign dine for the session, meaning there won't be any additional additions to funding or bills that were still being floated. All of those open items have essentially died, and therefore we do expect the legislature and the Joint Legislative Budget Committee rather to reconvene in June to look at the impact of the sales tax revenue declines and other revenue decreases related to the COVID-19 pandemic and any economic stimulus packages that might be considered at a state level, additional information on the federal stimulus package. So the crux of my update is we do not expect that there will be any additional funding for school districts for next year. We're watching closely if there will be any reductions. At this point, the budget's adopted, so we aren't expecting cuts, but we, of course, are monitoring this closely to see what the legislature will do in June. And we're very aware of the economic environment that we're operating in because of the pandemic. So that's the update I can share at this point. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none, then we can move on to agenda item number 5. And at the beginning of our meeting, I did introduce that we do have 2 guests joining us from our technology department. And I'll go ahead and ask Robert to launch their presentation, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. John Gay and Mr. Mike Triggerboff. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Ms. Myers and members of the committee. This is John Gay. I'm the Chief of Strategic Planning and Technology, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to present this information to you. Well, I guess Mike there is bringing it up, or Robert, whoever is bringing it. There it goes. I'm just going to speak for just a couple of minutes up front to kind of provide a little bit of information as to how we approached collecting this set of requirements to present to you tonight. And then I'm going to let Mike, Mr. Tregaboff, speak about the specific needs in the different technology areas. And then I'll pick it back up at the end to talk a little bit about some potential offsets to the amount of money represented in this set of bond requirements. So again, our purpose this evening is to present our essential needs for bond eligible technology equipment. Now, the good news is over the course of the last two bonds, the 2005 and 2012 bonds, we've been fortunate enough to be able to invest wisely in our technology environment. And as a result of that, we have a very capable infrastructure in terms of capacity, reliability, disaster recovery, et cetera, and resilience against cyber threats. And we've been able to take advantage of that as we've grown a number of programs that are dependent on technology. And we certainly are enjoying those capabilities right now, as we have very quickly and successfully moved to an almost completely virtual approach to operations, teaching and learning, as well as our other administrative operations. So again, as a result, the set of needs that Mr. Tregaboff is going to present tonight, that set of needs almost entirely represents life cycle replacements rather than any kind of growth or aspirational needs. There is one exception to the growth piece, which Mike will talk about, and it has to do with potential for growing our student laptop inventory to get closer to or to achieve one-to-one at certain grade levels. And those are just options that he will present. So again, essentially our approach is to present life cycle replacement needs over a typical 7-year period of the bond. These are based on what we believe are conservative views with regard to replacement cycles. Just as an example, we basically project our student laptops and staff laptops to last for a period of 6 years, whereas in the industry that tends to be more about 4 years or even 3 years in some cases. So we make those devices last a long time. And then there's some other assumptions in that pertain to the various categories of needs that Mike will point out. Again, after he finishes that portion of the presentation, I'll talk very briefly about some potential that we have for offsetting some of those costs. So with that said, Mike, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Good afternoon, everybody. As John just stated, I'm just going to state basically the requirements we feel that are needed to cover us if a bond is at your pleasure to go out and try to achieve. So the first one, let's just get right into it. Just give you a summary of what I'm going to present to you right now. We're going to talk about the student laptop replacement cycle, the staff laptop replacement cycle, our desktop replacement cycle, network infrastructure, our classroom projection systems, and our copier replacement cycle for the district. So let's just go into the first slide, talking about some assumptions first. When we talk about student laptops, again, we're talking about a 6-year life cycle for that. Again, we stretch ours further than what would be normally the industry standard in terms of life cycle. A couple assumptions that we're going to be as part of the numbers would be a 1% annual student enrollment growth, assuming that we would grow that much. It's a pretty modest, I think, assumption at this point, but we've added that in, as well as a 1% annual loss for damaged and unrepairable devices, which the thousands of devices we have, again, that's a pretty modest assumption just to say about 1%. So that is actually included in the numbers that you see in front of you. So the first one, the replacement of current inventory would have that 1% for damage and 1% for growth would be about 27,000 laptops that we would want to replace. The next one is if we decided to take our high schools only to a 1-to-1 growth, where basically they have each have their own individual laptop. Would be an additional 5,600 laptops if we chose to go down that road and say we want to have our high school students all have their own laptop from the school district. If we decided to go further and go 3 through 8th grade and make them all 1-to-1, that would be an additional 9,500 laptops. Those are all things that we could choose to do or not to do. The next one would be the cost. So for our current replacement cycle for 27,000 laptops, that would cost about $9,450,000 at the current rate of cost for a laptop today. If we wanted to add the 1-to-1 to high school only, that would be an additional 1.9 or $1,960,000 on top of the $9,450,000. So you would just add that to it. And then again, if we were to add the elementary school as to 1-to-1 for 3 to 8, that would be an additional $3,325,000. So if we did those three things, just replaced our 27,000 laptops, added 1-to-1 for all of the students from 3 through 12th grade, the total cost would be $14,735,000. I will stop for a moment and make sure there's no questions on that slide before I continue. Does anybody have any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Kirk Hobbs. I have a question about the replacement, the timing of the replacement. Is there a reason why you would replace all the laptops at the same time?
The only reason we would choose to do that now is because of the age currently. The laptops that we own for the most part right now are at least 3 to 5 years old. Also, this is the total replacement over the 7-year or 6-year period of the bond. So we wouldn't do them all at one time, but this is the cost it would be over the period of the bond. We would stagger the replacement.
Okay, I see. And then the replacement costs for the lost or damaged, do you think that's probably going to increase because of the fact that we have a lot more laptops out of our control now?
You mean in the current environment where we've handed out the laptops to students to take home?
Yes.
Yes, that's not accounted for in these numbers, but yes, that could affect this as well. But we didn't put that in the snapshot that we're giving you today. But yes, I would think that that's going to probably increase. It's hard to say what that's going to look like until we get the devices returned to us and see what percentage of those devices are lost or damaged.
Mike, let me jump in. This is John Gay. Thank you for that question. And our intention actually is to be able to recover from any of those losses that we incur as a result of the remote learning, so forth, before this bond period would actually start. So that's really why we did not include that in this particular estimate.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You bet.
Are there any other questions before I continue?
One more question, Mike. This is Annette McCarty. The 1-for-1 at all grade levels, wouldn't it be more, could we just do a needs-based versus an automatic 1-for-1? I mean, assuming that I understand not everyone has a computer, but some do, that would be a lower expense for the district?
Yeah, I think that would be at the pleasure of our academic services, but yes, that's something they could consider and talk about. But yeah, that would save some money, obviously, if we chose to look at that type of a model. I mean, from my perspective, that wouldn't be a decision I would make. It would be something I think from the district office, if they decided to go down that road, that something could be considered. But yes, Mike, I would agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, this is John again. Thank you for the question. The thing you run into with that, we've talked about this before, and you can unfortunately run into an equity problem if you take that kind of approach. Other districts have tried that, and it sounds like it makes a lot of sense, and you certainly can make that decision. But what happens sometimes is that you have students whose parents say, well, we have a device at home for our student, but what they really mean is they've got, let's say, an iPad, or they have or they say, well, I've got my student has a smartphone and it's fully capable of doing things, or we have a laptop, but it's 6 or 7 years old. And so without really uncovering and dealing with all those various differences, throughout the district, you can end up with some students having better capabilities than others, and it creates an equity problem. That doesn't mean it's an unsurmountable problem. It's just much more complicated to manage. It's sort of like the bring your own device models that people or some districts have tried, and you really very quickly realize how different devices are, and how sometimes some students are disadvantaged over others. So that's why we kind of assume a one-to-one take-home program. But as Mike has pointed out, this would be completely driven by academic needs as opposed to us just wanting to, just go there, for example.
Mike, this is Jan Okino. Taking that into consideration, currently with the laptops being out right now, are you collecting data as to the number of students in the Title I schools who have school devices with them right now that borrowed them versus non-title schools?
Right now, we have just about finished actually digitizing all of the inventory in our system about who's been assigned to what laptop. Once that occurs, there's not any demographics data in my inventory. We do have the student that is assigned to each laptop that was assigned. So at this point, no, we wouldn't do that. We could potentially if somebody asked, but at this point, all the laptops that have been checked out or delivered to students, they're assigned to them specifically, and we do know the school that they attend, but that would be the only data we have.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't looking for race or ethnic data. I was looking for school data because typically I would say that, I mean, in my mind, the higher degree of need was likely the Title I schools versus the non-title.
I can tell you we've checked out laptops, I mean, just anecdotally, from all across the district. Everything from up to North Peoria down to the southern schools. And we had a lot of traffic in all areas. So I could certainly give you the data on where most of the laptops or where the students, what schools have the most laptops checked out. That's something we could look at. And we're capable of doing that, but we haven't looked at it like that yet. We've concentrated on just making sure we have everything accounted for and the student that was assigned to which laptop at this point.
Correct.
And this is John again. One interesting phenomenon I think we've observed that is, I think, different in this situation than it might be in a normal situation where we wanted students to have laptops, is that in a lot of cases, both parents, if there are two parents in the household, are home working and using what laptops or devices they have there. And so I think that has driven some of the requirements in non-Title I schools where you would kind of assume that there's some of that technology at home, but the technology is being used pretty much all day by parents. And so we know that, at least anecdotally, from just conversations with parents. But I think that's probably a little different because of this unique situation than it might be in a normal situation.
Correct, I understand that. I also wanted to know, in terms of what's being out now, was it one per family or one per student?
The general rule of thumb that we followed with that was one for every 3 students. Now, if we had somebody with a special circumstance, we would certainly give them more, but that was the general rule. If they hit 4 students, we would give them 2. If 4 and 5, if they went above 6, we would give them 3. And again, there were special circumstances where we did give more than that, depending on what was needed in the home.
Okay, my point in making asking for this information is, as an educator that constantly looks ahead, if we go into a school year in the fall in which we are in a lockdown or partial lockdown, my current thinking is that technology is going to play a huge part in how we deliver instruction. So that's kind of why I was asking for that information. Could this information be gathered upon return? Let's just assume we open schools in the fall. Could this kind of data be collected upon return of the devices?
Sure, we could tell you all of that. That's certainly, we could certainly give you, yeah.
Not Not all data is good data, but some data might be good.
Okay.
This is Melissa Briggs. I have a question.
Okay.
When we were talking about what's driving the one-to-one ratios that you're looking at, we've only been talking about checking out laptops. And is that your primary consideration in thinking about one-to-one ratio, or are you thinking about more for in-classroom use, assuming that will be normalized, and so most students will be back in a classroom setting?
I will say that our numbers in here really are not. We're not considering what's happened with COVID or anything at this point with those numbers. That's if the academic services of our school district decided that it was appropriate to go to one-to-one. This is what it would take to do that. And
Mike,
so,
I think her question is a little different than that.
Okay.
And let me see if I can answer it. Again, this is John. The numbers really don't anticipate either having laptops to issue students to take home or just having them at the school. It just is numbers. And so the decision as to whether to allow students to take them home on a daily basis, or keep them at home or not, would be one we would work out with the Academic Support Services Organization. So again, it could go either way. There's nuanced differences associated with doing that, and of course, if the students take them home, then there's a greater opportunity for a little more loss and damage. But again, that decision would be made primarily as an academic decision.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, is when you said that was driven by academic needs, when you're considering that, if that was academic needs within the classroom or academic needs outside of the classroom.
Right, and again, I think it could go either way. I certainly know of some districts where they have one-to-one, but they don't let the students take them home. And then, of course, there's the one-to-one districts where they do let them take them home. So it's just a matter of what we think the academic need is, and whether or not we think we could manage a situation like that effectively.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hello, John and Mike and everybody. This is Rick. I was going to ask a question about how you guys do the assessment of academic needs versus the number of laptops we might need. And I guess it would it just occurs to me that if we don't know what the academic needs are, it's nice to have these numbers, but we don't know what to do with it, because we don't know how many we're going to need or what the academic services folks are going to recommend we need. And I guess the question I have is, do you guys have, or is the committee going to have access to what academic services thinks is going to be appropriate? Because without that information, it doesn't make any difference, no offense, what your numbers are.
Right, I appreciate that comment. And we don't know. I guess the straight answer is we don't know ourselves yet exactly what that need is going to be. Now, that said, that's number one why we presented both of these one-to-one options as options. But number two, in respect to your question, this period of the COVID-19 has seriously reinforced the importance of individual student access to technology. Before we got into the COVID-19 environment, we were already in many schools pushing the envelope in terms of students having sufficient access to laptops. Just let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This happens a lot at the elementary level, but I know it happens to a certain extent as well at the high school level, where students are making increasing use of online instructional applications, whether for core instruction, like an iReady, for example, or whether as a intervention or supplemental instruction. And so I have heard anecdotally of a number of cases where students who need to make use of technology to do whatever it is, whether it's pursue a intervention, or whether it's just simply using technology as a tool to do whatever work that they're doing, that oftentimes the needs for students to use the technology for core instruction or even for testing interferes with their ability to have access. Now, it's not a widespread problem yet, but it's certainly a growth or a growing problem, I should say. So we know that we're going to reach the point very, very quickly, and the COVID-19 situation, I think, is going to accelerate that need toward one-to-one. So we have yet to have conversations about exactly what is the tipping point to go to one-to-one, but on the assumption that if we were to go out for a bond at the very earliest, and of course this is the work of your committee to decide what the recommendations are for that, but the very earliest obviously is this fall, and that means at the very earliest we would be acquiring additional laptops would be most likely fiscal 22. So that's really a year and a half, couple of years from now, and so we believe the need will have grown substantially in those areas. Now, whether at that point we believe we should go to one-to-one, and if so, at what grade levels, we just don't know yet. That's why we're presenting it as an option.
This is
Let me,
Beltram.
can I follow up on that just a little bit?
Sure.
I would suggest that the replacement of existing laptops to some degree, and I'm guessing your 9.4 million replaces them all. Did I miss that part, or is that just the needed replacements?
The 9 point, you know what? Part of my screen's blocked with some of the team stuff, but no, the $9.45 million is placement of the existing inventory. We
Okay,
have.
so
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that's all the inventory, and that's a good number to have, because one could kind of presume that however many laptops we have right now, they're all being used at roughly capacity. So you could probably make the case that something close to that 9.4 is what might be needed for bond. The question that I have, and I've been hearing some rumors that some of the school districts are thinking they're not even going to open up this fall. In which case, I'm wondering, do we have enough laptops if we reprioritize things for the critical needs to be done? You know, you give those laptops to the absolutely critical kids because they have to have them for their class, and we back them off from, say, the younger kids who are using them just in the classroom. Would we have enough inventory to cover a situation like that?
Well, that's a great question. Let me just put it this way. We currently have about 20,000 laptops. The 27,000 you see on the slide is replacement at a 6-year life cycle. So it looks like it's more, but it's just basically keeping up with small enrollment growth as well as a 7-year program. Okay, so we're really talking about, we have roughly 20,000 laptops right now. We've issued out a little over 6,000 of those right now. So if we stayed in this mode when school started, and if it looked like we were going to be in it for a long time, we could open that back up and issue, well, I don't know, several thousand more based on critical needs. And at that time, we'd have to have a discussion about what exactly constitutes a critical need. And at that point, and I'm just kind of speculating here and imagining what that conversation would be. We're talking not just about needs in terms of kids with socioeconomic challenges, but we're also talking about grade level criticality, which I think is kind of what you suggested. So we would have to have that conversation, yeah, and figure out what that looks like.
That was more my drift, and you couldn't, if everybody is if the third graders are learning online as well as the high school kids, obviously the third graders need access as well. But I'm wondering if do you stagger the use, and can we get by with what we've got? How many more? I think that's a plan that the district ought to be thinking about putting together, and because as you said, I think, John, you were the one who mentioned it. Even if we got all the money in the bond, it's 2022 before we'd get that hardware. In which case, one would hope by then we've got the economy back up and everything's back to normal. Because if it's not, nobody's going to have any money to pay for $9 million worth of laptops. So I don't know how we balance that out, but I think it's sort of incumbent upon the district to at least be thinking in those terms and providing some suggestions on, given this scenario or these contingencies, this is what we would suggest we try to do to make as much progress on getting kids educated as we can.
In fact, we
Hey,
are.
Rick and John, can I interject real quick?
Certainly, yeah.
That's what the task force has started meeting for with Sean Duguid right now. We're talking about all of those things and the what if scenarios. We're in the process of working on what you're talking about right now. That really just started. The last couple, we've had 2 meetings so far. So Sean's heading up that task force, and we're talking about all of those needs and the what if scenarios in terms of if school doesn't start in the schools in the fall. We're weighing all of those and what does that look like? How are we going to handle that? So just let you know that is in another committee right now.
Okay. I'm just wondering if we need some cross-pollination from that committee to help us make some more decisions. But they probably don't have the answers yet. So
yeah, we're starting to
here.
work on that though.
Yeah. Okay.
This is Patty. Can I just ask a clarifying question on that? So if you took the replacements of our current and then the 1-to-1 to high school and elementary, is that basically what we're saying would be a 1-to-1 throughout the district, just in case? Is that what I'm reading as well?
It's not throughout. It's the very, very youngest grades would not be covered by that.
Okay, John, so this is Jan again. So what if we go back to a scenario in which we don't go back to school in the fall, but we kind of think of school differently in terms of maybe distance learning is going to be something we do on a semi-permanent or even permanent basis with some students in some grade levels. Wouldn't that include K through 2?
I agree, Jan.
As Mike and I together thought, we come up with all kinds of options. And so we chose to put those 2 options there just to give you a sense. And so if indeed we ended up going to a situation where teaching and learning is done remotely as a matter of course, or frequently, or often, or whatever it is, then we certainly would have to consider the needs of the K through 2 students. We might satisfy those needs slightly differently, let's say with a lower cost tablet as opposed to a laptop, but those would be details that we would have to address when we got to that point. So the point of this was not to say we would never do K through 2. It's just to say, here are some options that we would consider doing going forward and to give you an idea of what those would cost.
This is Patty. I think we're going to be discussing desktop models here in just a moment as well.
Right.
But going back to Rick's original question of academic services needs, there are Arizona state technology standards, and they start at kindergarten and they go all the way through high school. So as for needs, even before COVID-19, I do believe we're seeing that we needed more of a 1-to-1 or additional technology as well. So anyway, maybe we're going to cross that when we get into the desktop model. John, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, John.
I apologize. You know what? I was already unmuted and clicked it, muted myself. We don't specifically address that in this presentation, although clearly the Arizona state standards pertaining to technology, as you said, are K through 12. And as we go forward, we're going to have to consider what does that mean in terms of technology. I think we're a ways away from that at this point. We can, and by the way, I guess it's kind of an implied message in the desktop part of the presentation, which Mike will get to in just a moment. But we are saying with this presentation that we want to maintain the number of desktop labs that we have in the district. So our thinking there is that even if we increase or grow the inventory of laptops to be one-to-one at various grade levels, we still want to support the existing number of labs that we have at elementary and high school grade levels, so that additional technology competencies can be addressed by using those labs. So that's kind of what's behind the idea of doing the desktop replacement. Yes, I point that out because some districts have essentially dismantled all of their desktop labs in favor of laptops for students on a one-to-one basis. And our thought at this point is that there's a lot of academic discussion that needs to take place down the road as we get further into this. And as we think through that, we want to keep our desktop labs refreshed so that students at all grade levels can have access to those things as well.
This is Ray Connolly. I'm wondering if in the interest of time, we could allow the presenters to go through their presentation and we hold our questions until the end of their presentations. Is that possible?
Great suggestion, Ray. I do have a technical question. My screen is black, so I'm wondering if you're sharing something or if I need to restart. Sorry.
Presentation, Patty.
I think it's your end, Patty. It seems to be fine on this end.
Okay, Mike, maybe in the interest of time, you should go ahead.
Okay.
And maybe we'll just go right through and then save the questions for the end.
Okay. So moving on to the staff laptops, again, standard life cycle will be 6 years again. 1% for annual loss and damage for unrepairable devices. We don't see really, insignificant growth for the staff numbers. Obviously, there could be a slight number of growth, but it won't be nearly what the students would see. So essentially planning for, again, the cycle of total staff replacement over that 6-year period of time would be about 2,800 laptops. And the cost would be about $2.3 or $2,380,000. I'm just going to go ahead and go through the rest of the presentation, and we can go back to this if we want to reference it. Moving on to the desktop models, desktop replacement, 7-year cycle. We're stretching those out a little bit further. Assuming no change in the labs at this point in time, approximate cost is about $650 a piece. We have 6,670 desktops district-wide. That's the standard model we use to replace all of those in that same time frame for $4,335,000. We do have some high-end desktops in our media production classrooms. That would be about 300 devices that we would replace, and those are about $1,500 a piece, and the cost for those would be about $450,000. And then our total cost, including those two together, would be $4,785,000. And I'm just going to go through all of this and we can come back if you guys have questions. So this is network infrastructure. So we have servers at each and every one of our schools. Servers we can make last quite a long time, 7 to 10 years if parts are available. I will say that the industry standard is still about 4 to 5 years really for a server, but we can get more out of them and have in the school district. An approximate cost is about, as of today for the server, would be about $11,000 for each server. And so total cost replacement would be about $1 million. Switches, again, standard cycle on those would be about 5 years. Distribution switches are about 6 years, but we can get a little bit more out of those sometimes too. But again, it depends on the parts cycle, those types of things. The manufacturers generally stop supporting them after this period of time. Because again, industry standards about 3.5 to 4 years on switching. So the total cost would be about $2.5 million. And then our wireless access point for our wireless network. This is broken down into two different things. We have about 1,600 of them are approximately 6 years old, and then another 1,000 of them are about 5 years old. And approximate cost for those are about $800 a piece, and it would be about $2 million for district-wide replacement for all of those. The projection systems for the classroom, basically the projectors in every classroom that we have, they're about 5 to 6 years old at this point in time. We would need to replace those, or would hope to replace those during the bond period. So that would be about 2,400 classrooms. I'm using a cost model for some of the new technology that would be available. So about $1,900 for that, or say $2,000. And so if we use that, it would be $4.7 million or $4.8 million to replace our classroom systems. Copier replacement. I'd like to explain this a little bit too. The total click life or duty cycle, if you want to think of it, in our copiers, all of them will be past that in the next 3 years. We have a good percentage of them right now. That's probably about 20% of them are already past the click life. Basically means that the wear and tear on those copiers are way past what their usability is, and they're having to be repaired constantly. And so it's time to replace them. We have 97 in the inventory right now. These are the production copiers at the schools, is what we're talking about, the big copiers. We're looking to try to reduce that. So due to redundancy, we think we could reduce this by 33. And as basically they can no longer be repaired, we would just take them out of service and not have the redundancy at the schools, and really encourage use at the copy center a whole lot more. Try to leverage that more, which it already is, but we could increase the capacity of that as well. And then only buying 64 copiers for replacement across the district. And then those are about 22,000 a piece, giving us, if we did only 64, it would be about 1.4 million. The last slide will basically have our totals on it. And I think here we can go back and reference anything that I've talked about if you guys have questions. But everything that we just talked about would total, and this would include the one-to-one initiatives from 3 to 12th grade. If we were to do this, would be about 33 million, or almost $33,800,000. I think at this point we can start taking questions on that from any of the slides, and I can go back if you need me to.
If I could, this is John. Before we dive into questions, we certainly want to hear your questions. I wanted to talk just a little bit about some potential for offsetting some of these costs, and it's only potential, but I want the committee to be aware of it as the budget at the state, et cetera, starts becoming more clear going forward. So there's a couple of things we can consider. You're probably aware, I'm sure Michelle has talked about it, that the governor was on a path to restore district additional assistance or capital to the pre-recession levels. But that restoration, and some of that has taken place, that restoration has at least been temporarily halted or slowed down. And so we don't know exactly what that's going to look like going forward. There is the potential that we could apply approximately upwards of $1 million a year towards some of these purchases. Now, again, all of that depends on other programs as well. And so we're just kind of trying to take a guess at what we might have available if the program, or if capital or DAA continues to be restored, and if we can, for example, have a bond that addresses some of the other needs like building maintenance and so on and so forth. But if we could apply about $1 million per year, that's obviously over the life of the bond purchases, about $7 million that we could, of costs that we could offset here as well. Another possibility, and I'm calling these possibilities because we simply don't know until these things start rolling out whether these will be available to us or not. But the federal E-rate program is always out there, and it's a possibility. It only applies to the network infrastructure devices, just the switches and access points. It doesn't apply to servers and things like that. This is, again, a potential. In previous years, up till about 3 or 4 years ago, it was virtually impossible to get E-rate reimbursement for equipment like this. In the last few years, that's opened up a little bit, but given that the program seems to be changing a lot these days, we don't know what that would look like. However, if it holds true to what it is today, we could get as much as about a 60% cost reimbursement for some of those network infrastructure needs. That could potentially result in savings of approximately $3.3 million over the 7 years. And then finally, in the interest of the different options that the committee may have in terms of recommending things, if the committee decided to do something like a bridge bond or something more short term, and let's say it was a 5-year bond period instead of 7, for example, that would affect really only the life cycle replacements of the student and staff laptops and desktops. There might be some minor savings in other areas, but it would primarily be in those end user devices. That could total up to as much. And by the way, we would obviously assume no one-to-one growth as part of that kind of a bridge bond or a shorter term bond approach. And so taking that money out, we could, assuming no one-to-one would save us $5.3 million, and then making it additionally the 5-year period could potentially save us another $3.5 million. So we wanted to throw those out there so that you know that there's potential to reduce that total $33.7 million price tag or cost estimate that Mike has presented. So with that, we'd love to turn it over to any questions that the committee members may have.
I have a question about the E-rate. What is the E-rate?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I should have addressed that. The federal E-rate program was a program that it's actually managed by the Federal Communications Commission, done by a kind of a company that they created to do that work. And it's called the USAC, Universal Services Advisory Company. And what it is, it's a program that was started in about 1996, and it was designed to help school districts and libraries, public school districts and libraries, to get better access to technology, primarily networking technology. So broadband networking technology, all the switching and so forth required to deliver that into the classrooms and so forth. And so citizens actually, and businesses actually fund that program with a very, very tiny surcharge. It's called the universal surcharge. And if you look at your own, whether you have a landline at home or your cell phones, if you look at the bill, you'll see it buried in there somewhere. It's like, 1 or 2 cents a month or some very, very low amount, but it adds up to approximately $4 billion a year nationally that funds this E-rate. Of course, that stands for education rate program. And basically what it amounts to is that eligible services and equipment in that program, the cost for those things can be reimbursed. And it's all based on the socioeconomic conditions of the schools and the districts and the libraries. That's almost always measured by the participation in the free and reduced lunch program. So for Peoria, our current reimbursement rate for E-rate eligible items is right at 60%. And so just as an example, we get a substantial reimbursement every year for our internet access that we get through Cox communication, as an example. There are the other E-rate eligible things like voice, our connection to the external voice network and mobile phone services and so forth. That has been phased out. So right now in Peoria, it's almost exclusively internet access that we get, almost exclusive, that we get reimbursement for. We have just in the last couple of years gotten some reimbursement for some of our switching and access point acquisitions as well.
I have, thank you. I have another question about recycling and the value. So what are we doing with the equipment? And is there any value that can be reducing the overall cost as it relates to recycling?
Give a very brief answer, and then I think Ms. Myers may want to weigh in as well. We are constrained with regard to what we can do with equipment once it's outlived its useful life. And essentially what we do is we turn over devices, equipment like that, to our warehouse organization, and they typically put that equipment up for auction. But beyond that, I want to let Mrs. Myers weigh in with any other details on how that works.
Thank you, John. So when it comes to asset disposals, and that could be a $200 item or a $10,000 item, there are certain requirements in statute related to the district disposing of items that are bought with public monies. And with that, we do have the ability to trade items in. Let's say you're buying a new bus, you could possibly trade in an existing bus, or if something has gone through its useful life, but it still has a value, one appropriate mechanism is to use a public surplus auction. And actually, items are at our warehouse, but it's our fixed asset accountant and our business team that helps manage that process. So it's actually in partnership with our warehouse, but it's the fixed asset accountant who ultimately has the management responsibility. And so there's the public surplus auction opportunity. And then there's also times when something has really no value, and if we've followed our requirements, you can dispose of items as scrap as well. But with that, I will say sometimes, for instance, the old TVs that we think of before flat screens, the district has incurred costs to dispose of some older technology because it has either the CRT tubes or materials that can't just go in a landfill. So you actually have to pay a company to do electronic recycling. And then oftentimes within that agreement, depending on what's being transferred to the recycling company, we get small checks back. Per state guidance, there is a requirement to put those proceeds in a plant fund that can, depending on the district's debt limit and other requirements, that either requires those proceeds to reduce our tax rate, or it can be used for capital purchases at a district level. So in a nutshell, that's our requirement process related to the disposal of assets. And we do also track our assets, $1,000 or greater. From a stewardship perspective, anything 5,000 or greater is actually capitalized and depreciated and reported in our financial statements. And we do have an inventory requirement that we manage district-wide as well.
Hi, this is Patty. I have 3 questions, if that's okay. The first question is, you were just talking about recycling. Can those computers go to, say, a cybersecurity program? That's the first question.
So I'm going to ask, before you add your other 2 questions, what are you referring to within the Peoria Unified School District? Is that your question?
Correct. Can the useful life computers then go to a cybersecurity program or a program within the district?
Are you asking if those technology items would ultimately become an instructional aid?
Possibly, yes.
I can, Patty, let me just jump in a little bit on that. In prior groups of years, for lack of a better term, we have been kind of forced to buy laptops and things like that in very large quantities all at once. And so what we're trying to do going forward, both with capital and with whatever bond money we may be able to obtain, is to go with an annual replacement cycle, which is much more cost effective and easier to sustain. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is that part of the plan that we're working on there is that at the end of those 6 years that we talked about for laptops and desktops, for example, we would keep those pieces of equipment for additional, the equipment that's over that age for an additional year or two to be used for various things. It could be spares, replacements, or it could be for purposes like you described. Now, the challenge with that kind of recycling, if you will, is that if those devices, if it's necessary to put those on our network, then we've got a problem. Because once they've gone past that useful age, it's not just wear and tear of the hardware itself, but its ability to support cybersecurity requirements on the operating system and things of that nature. So to really directly answer your question, the idea would be, yeah, if we have equipment that is past its fully operational life, we could certainly use them as instructional aids, if you will, for a cybersecurity class or something like that, as long as they didn't have to be literally on our network.
Thank you. I think Mike was going to also chime in that there used to be a program where we could take the end of useful life computers and we would build them and it would be able to then be used by students as well. So just reminiscent of that as well. So my second question, on page 5 of the PowerPoint, it mentions desktop computers. Replacement, is that K-8 labs as well as junior high labs?
Yes, that's all of our desktops district-wide for every grade level.
Okay, then my third and last question so far is the high-end computers. It just mentions film and TV. I believe that there's additional higher-end computers for engineering, computer programming, and some others. Is that also included?
They are included in the district-wide labs because the standard computer will meet the needs for most of the other programs. What we would have to do is a minor upgrade, generally with the graphics card for most of the other programs. And that's all that would be required, because the rest of the computer would meet the needs in terms of processor, memory, those types of things, hard drive size, yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Gay or Mr. Triggerboff?
I have a question for Mr. Gay. Regarding the projectors in the classrooms, has any thought been given to using something other than projectors? Because I remember they would tell us that when the bulb went out, it was almost more cost efficient to buy a brand new projector because of the cost of the bulbs. Like possibly using smart TVs in the classroom with the hope or the intent of lasting longer than a projector would?
We've talked about that really at length, and I'll jump in, and then Mike can add anything that he sees fit. So a couple of things. It's very difficult to know exactly what we'll want to use to replace our current projection and smart board technology and so forth. As when we get to that point, a couple of things that are happening. One, certainly flat screens are being used more frequently, intelligent flat screens. And we've looked at those prices, and they really vary quite a bit, of course, according to size and capability. So the roughly $2,000 that Mike listed in that presentation could conceivably cover intelligent televisions at that point. Right now, the large ones, let's say like 75, 83-inch ones, are a little more than that, but we're pretty sure that they'll come down in price over the next few years as well. So that $2,000 could address that. I will tell you that not everybody likes those because even at 75 inches, they are not always the best approach to, let's call it, group level instruction. But that said, that would be an option. The second point I would like to make is that you're absolutely right about the current projector technology that we have. The bulbs are very expensive, and Mike can talk about specific bulb life, but it's not very long. So the $2,000 price per unit that Mike quoted is the newer LED technology, and those bulbs last, it's just thousands and thousands of hours. And so what would be very nice with those is that in addition to a much longer bulb life, so basically those things would last way beyond the end of the bond period, for example. But in addition to that, they also have some newer approaches like short throw and things like that, in combination with software-based interactivity, that we'd be able to achieve fundamentally the same results as in intelligent flat screens. Mike, did you want to add to that?
The standard projector that we have right now, the bulb life is about 4,000 to 5,000 hours. What I have listed here is a laser projector. This is laser technology, and these last 20,000 hours. So you can see the difference in terms of length of life for a projector like this. Not to they're also 4K, very rich in terms of color. The technology is just far better in terms of the quality of the image that the students would see. And then, of course, you could go to interactive displays, which are still going to be slightly more expensive. And interactive displays go from a little bit more than what you see right now to all the way up to $8,000 to $10,000, depending on the type of interactive display. But this is a good technology. The laser technologies really come leaps and bounds, and it's very high quality, and the length of time is really good on them. But it doesn't mean we have to go with that. But that's the idea.
Thank you.
So Mike, this is Jan. So you're talking about the projector, right? And so we have to project them on something, correct?
Yes, that is correct. This would be a projection system in the classroom, replacing the current projectors they have.
So the projectors plus the screen that they're being projected on?
No, this is actually a standard projector that I'm talking about here. So the screen would still be valid that they have in the classroom. This would just be replacing the projector. That's all we would have to replace.
Okay.
I have a quick question about leasing versus purchasing. I'm assuming that leasing, doesn't have a cost savings.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Hobbs. I can certainly speak to that. Leasing opportunities do exist for school districts. However, it doesn't necessarily result in a cost savings, as you mentioned. The bigger issue with the difference between leasing and making purchases with tax-exempt bonds is if you have a capital lease in place, you're using your annual funding to pay those lease payments, where when you're able to use a bond authorization and to sell tax-exempt bonds, you have potentially a lower interest rate, but also you're not using your annual budget allocations from the state to make those payments.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Other questions?
Guys, this is Rick. It's already almost quarter after 5. We probably should be getting through the rest of the presentations that we've got. I think of great interest are going to be the bond question presentations and the override presentations. So I would just suggest we kind of hustle along here if we can.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Guttridge. And I will say, as a highlight for those agenda items, they're for reference. We are going to invite Mr. Lundberg to join us next week, and the majority of the meeting next week will be spent to construct different tax rate scenarios. We've got that reference information today, but I just wanted to assure the committee that there will be a significant amount of time dedicated at the next next meeting rather, for the group to do that. But I would agree with your recommendation. If there are no further questions, we will move on with the agenda. Thank you again, Mr. Gay and Mr. Trigubov.
Very well.
And so now we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is a summary document that Robert has already launched, and Mr. Duguid's going to speak to it, and I'll add a few comments. And Mr. Duguid, if you'd like to start us off.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all today. A lot of this information is very straightforward. So in the essence of time, Mr. Guttridge, as you pointed out, I'll be brief in my descriptions and stand for questions certainly at the end. But as you can see on the screen, we've got costs for this next fiscal year. Please know that I worked with Phil Camacho, who's our Director of Transportation, as well as our fleet manager, who's also our head mechanic, who's been with us for a very, very long time, to bring these numbers to you this evening. So in fiscal year 2021, we look to purchase an AV vehicle. And for those of you that may not know what that is an activity vehicle that we use with our sports teams to take them from site to site for away games. 5 regular ed and 5 special ed buses is what we're anticipating needing in the fiscal year 2021. For the next 4 years, as you can see, we will need, looking to purchase 11 transit vans, 10 trucks, which are used by certainly our facilities folks, and we also use those at all of our school sites, or the majority of our school sites. Not everyone has a truck. 6 cars that will be utilized for driver's ed as well as regular use, and the regular use be characterized as somebody that's a district employee. Think of somebody at the district office as myself. I could take a district vehicle as I travel around site to site in my duties in my position. 3 food service trucks, 7 additional activity vehicles. Again, those will be located at our high schools. And over the next 4 years, during that time, we look to purchase 25 of each regular ed and special ed buses at the cost that you see in front of you. Moving on to the next screen, we decommission at least 1 bus each year, which means that it is not up to snuff and not either safe, or it's reached the end of its useful life. We just a tidbit of information. We drove 200,000 miles for our McKinney Vento students that we serve, and if you remember, those are our homeless students that we service throughout really the valley that come to our schools. You see the age of the bus fleet in front of you. As you would expect or hope to see, the total of our fleet that is 2009 or older is 48 units, and 2014 or newer are 112. So we did purchase with our last bond authorization 5 additional regular education buses and 5 special ed buses, and we hope to receive those sometime in June for use in the coming school years, obviously. So with that, I went through it pretty quick, but as I said, a lot of it's pretty straightforward. So if anybody has any questions, I can certainly take them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Duguid. If I may add just a quick comment in regard to the current year purchase. The committee may recall that in our 2012 bond, the $180 million bond authorization that we just finalized last year, the last bond sale within that authorization, there is a line item for transportation vehicles, and for fiscal 20 and for the remainder of the bond authorization, there was about $4 million remaining earmarked for transportation vehicles. So after this 2020 purchase that has been made, there's about $2.4 million remaining on that line item. And so with that, the 2021 needs within this document can be purchased from the remaining bond But what's an important thing to note when you look at the mix of the items, a bus, for example, can be purchased from a bond, a student transportation vehicle. But when we talk about technology and computers, they have a shorter useful life and it requires a separate amortization. So we'll always break those types of purchases out. So some of the vehicle needs that are listed here might have to fall within either a shorter amortization, or if they're not meeting the definition of a student transportation vehicle, we would have to use capital dollars, or for instance, with the food service needs, if ADE granted our request, we could use food service funds. So I just wanted to add that from the funding side of it, that there are some requirements, but we do traditionally include all of our regular and special education buses within our bond authorization. So we're rounding that number to be a need if we had a critical needs bond of about $10 million of student transportation vehicle purchases based on the analysis. Thank you, Mr. Duguid.
Thank you, Mrs. Myers. Were there any questions that I could entertain?
Mr. Duguid, this is Jan Ogino. I was just wondering, in any of those vehicles, are any of them energy efficient in terms of using natural gas or electric or hybrid or anything like that?
You know, Jen, that's a great question, and I don't believe we have any of those in our fleet at this time.
I was just wondering.
Oh, it's a good question.
Hey, Sean, it's Annette McCarty.
Hi, Annette.
Just a general question on, are the parameters of how far out we bus ever readdressed based on our funding crisis in Arizona? I know that, you know, I'm dating myself, but in the 70s up in Washington, our school district also struggled with levies passing, and they would move out the distance of when it became necessary to bus us to school.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
As a cost savings.
As a cost savings. You know, we follow what the state guides us with that, Annette, and that's with we bus elementary students at a mile or more and high school students at a 1.5 miles or more away from the school, or if they have to cross a major artery, a major street, then we also bus them. So we do follow the state guideline from that. So we have not had any discussion with the state or amongst ourselves with regard to changing that, but that could be something that, given the situation that we're in, we could certainly do.
I just want to say we used to walk 6 miles to school.
Uphill, both ways, in the snow. I got you, Mr. Hobbs. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so very much, everyone.
All right, thank you, Mr. Duguid. And so if we're following along with our agenda, we're now at agenda item number 7. And some of this information the committee has seen before, so it's just a reminder, a point of reference as we move in to agenda item number 8. But I'll ask Robert if you could please launch or go to the 2 agenda items that have the Roman numeral 7, please. Oh, that would be number 8. Okay, thank you. And so just for a quick point of reference, and you've seen this before, I believe it was on the second meeting in February with the committee, but just the reminder, we have had an override and maintenance and operations override in place going back to 1996. Our current override, which is a 13%, was approved by the voters in November of 2015. And here for your reference, again, are the percentages that we've had historically. And then if we go to the next slide or the next handout, you've seen this as well, and I'll have updated year-to-date numbers next time we meet. But just to remind the committee that our current 13% override provides $27.8 million of funding for the district. That number in fiscal 19 was 26.3 million. It's calculated as 13% of our revenue control limit. So if that revenue control limit increases, the 13% calculation also increases. And so that's why that difference exists between the 2 years, because of inflation restoration and the 20 by 2020. Our use of the override is approved by the voters in the pamphlet, and our current override, as a reminder, we have listed the areas of support that it provides, and I won't belabor going through each one because you've seen it before, but as we start to talk, and as the committee talks about in the next agenda item, perhaps priorities of a bond and override, or just an override, or critical needs versus comprehensive bond, I just wanted to refresh everyone's memories that our current bond and going back to when it was, current override, and going back to when it was a 10% override, has funded consistent categories. The difference from the 10% to the 13% was the addition of the payment of all-day kindergarten for our community. Next meeting that we have, I will have the open item request on what did we use to charge. I have that information, and it will be provided to you at the next meeting. But also that change from 10% to 13% provided additional compensation for our staff. So Robert, if you click down to the next slide, please, and you might have to enlarge this, and this is in your materials. For last year, it shows a more detailed slicing and dicing of those override dollars. And the committee last year saw this as well. And so this is something that's not new, but just a reminder. And with that, as you talk about an override option, it is within the purview of the committee to say, you know what, we'd like to add a category. Last time we went out, we added safety initiatives, safety positions and training to the index of funding areas. So you could also add another category within 13%. And so I just wanted to make that comment. And I've gone through this quickly for the sake of time. It's again for your reference. Next meeting, we'll have a large portion of the meeting set aside, if you will, for these conversations. So this is kind of just a starting point. If you'll recall, we moved this agenda item. We tabled this agenda item from March 10th. So I just wanted to bring it back. And if there aren't any other questions, we'll move on to agenda item number 8. Okay, hearing none. And Robert, there are a number of handouts with this agenda item. May I ask you to go to, and let me give you the actual file name to start, please. Let's see. It would be the Peoria Unified 5 and 10-year project, and then Peoria Unified projects by priority, please. Okay, thank you. We'll start with this one. This is the 15-year by priority handout. You did receive this last time we met, where we had the presentation from ADM Group and Think Smart Planning. So you already have this. I just am pulling it up for reference that 2 of the handouts that we received showed priority projects or costs, if you will, by school as high, medium, and low. And then if we go to the next slide, where it's the 5-year, 10-year, please, Robert. This slide allocates costs across a 10-year planning horizon versus a 15. And this format could help the committee consider a critical needs bond. Now, something that's new that you have in your handouts, and I'll have Robert go back to this particular handout. It's going to be Summary Observations Priorities. That's the name of it, please. We've asked ADM Group to provide the summary, the project summary for each school, the observations and priorities, as a companion to the other two handouts that I'm referencing tonight. So as the committee reviews these materials and in preparation for the next time we meet, you can see what was identified as a priority or a project at each school that then aligns to those dollar amounts. So we thought that might be helpful to foster discussion at the next meeting. Before I move on, are there any questions on the three documents we just looked at? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. This will help the committee prepare for the next meeting. So you'll have the opportunity to review this on your own. But again, it kind of helps identify school by school what was deemed a priority or an observation. So we also had two requests last time we met, which are embedded in this agenda item. The first request was, can the committee talk about what we're seeing as priorities from a committee perspective? And so this agenda item is agendized that includes discussion. So committee members are welcome to comment at this time. In addition, there was a request to start providing tax rates associated either with bond authorization amounts or override amounts. So now at this time, Robert, I'm going to ask you please to toggle back to three documents, and it would be Peoria USD Committee Bond Scenario, Peoria USD M&O would be the next title, and then the third file is the one that I emailed you. That's the bar chart, and with this one, I might have to have you enlarge it, and we'll tab down. This information we just received today, and I'll email this out to the committee as well. I apologize. I realized after I sent the email, I don't have this in your PDFs, but after the meeting, I'll email that out, and we'll also post it on the district website. But what you'll see with the handout that we received in February when Brian Lundberg and the team from Stiefel, Nicholas and Company presented, at that point, he shared tax rates that align with different override percentages going from 10 up through 15. And then here now we have updated information looking at a variety of bond authorization sizes, everything from what we would call a starting point for a critical needs bond, all the way up to a comprehensive bond. And it tells a story, and what I mean by that right now in the materials, and I don't know, Robert, if you can toggle back to the other two handouts, and I'll have you go to a couple of slides for me to make comments. Not this April one yet. If you could go to the February one, I believe it's February 26th. Perfect. And then if you page down, and I don't know if we can go up one page, please. And then if we can enlarge this, I know it might be rather small for your screen, but here, Mr. Lundberg broke out the percentages of an override and the associated funding amount, as well as the tax rate associated with the limited assessed valuation for properties within the district. At that presentation, he did talk about assessed valuation projections, and he shared information with the group. And then you might recall Randy Stein walked the committee through how to read a tax bill and how that's calculated. And so we see highlighted in a tan color in the middle our current 13% override, which has a tax rate of $1.42 per $100 of limited assessed valuation. You can see the dollar change per $100 of limited assessed valuation if we went up or down or stayed the same. So this will become part of our conversation at the next meeting. As you build a tax rate, we can look at our current tax rate as well as the impacts of recommendations you might make. So we'll go ahead and leave this presentation, and Robert, if you could now go to the April 22nd presentation, please. And if you'll tab down, or page down rather. One more. We'll look at two reference items here. The first is, again, showing where we went from 75 million up to 250 million as just potential dollar amounts to provide for the committee the tax rate associated with each, and how that tax rate changes over time. And what I mean by that is, Robert, now if you go to the bar graph, the file that I just emailed you. Thank you. And if we enlarge that, because I know it's hard to see, you might have to make it larger. I have my glasses on and I still cannot see it. If you go up to the top, I need to see what that says. Okay, that's with the largest scenario we've got, just as an example, and then we're actually going to see how that changes. You'll note that in blue is our existing bonds, not taking into consideration the next principal payment we make in July of 2020, which if you compare the two presentations, you'll see some of the scenarios Mr. Lundberg had in February has the fiscal year 2021 number and amount. The difference, the delta between the two is our pending July payment. So this is as of today without our next principal payment. Blue means existing bonds. And then you'll see, based on the timing of a potential bond authorization and associated bond sales, how that blue, the existing issued bonds from our 2012 bond program, 2005, 2002, all of those bond authorizations with existing bond sales, how they're amortized and paid off over time, and how that tax rate associated with those bond sales decreases and then could be backfilled with a new bond program, which still over the entire amortization timeline would reduce the tax rate. So that's the largest scenario we're looking at. That's a comprehensive bond. Now, Robert, if you page down, and again, the committee, maybe not that fast, please go up to the first slide again, and then we'll just methodically go to the next one. Okay, keep going up, please. So the next one is, that's still the 250. Do you mind going down one page, please? Okay, now we're at 225, and you can see that the smaller the bond authorization, the more significantly the tax rate drops. And then if you tab down again, you'll see we go from 225 to 200. And then if you'll tab down again, we're now at 175. And again, you see the significant change. But the takeaway from this, with any of the scenarios from our current tax rate on down, you'll see a decline, even with a new bond program. We will spend a lot of time next time we meet looking at this in detail. Mr. Lundberg's going to be here to answer questions, but I wanted to get this information to the committee and to do the introduction today to now turn the floor over to the committee for comments on priorities. You requested last time we met that you'd like time to chat as a group to maybe get a feel for where the committee is. And I'll go ahead and mute now. Thank you.
Michelle, I have a quick question for you. I have a small phone that I'm attending this meeting on, and I cannot see a single speck of detail on the presentation you just went through. You're going to email those to us so I can look at them on a big screen?
Yes, in fact, you have received everything that we've looked at today, with the exception of this bar chart, which I'll be emailing out tonight. Some of these materials just came in today, so I appreciate the patience of the committee as we try to turn things around very quickly for you. You will receive this in email. It will also be on the district website. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do the introduction today, you would have the full materials for a week and any additional materials that we'll provide next week. But that way you're prepared to have that robust conversation and also to ask any questions you might have of Mr. Lundberg.
Okay, that'll be good.
But I think the intent from the committee last time we met was to get a feel. Mr. Barella shared a comment, I believe it was Mr. Barella. So again, you can have a conversation. This is also discussion for a bond and or override. So if the committee would like to share any thoughts as we get ready for next week's meeting, you can certainly do that at this time, or you can wait as well. It's truly up to the committee.
This is Melissa. I have a quick question. So we've gotten lots of really specific numbers for critical needs and specific numbers for technology and IT, but what we haven't seen, we saw the utilization study, but what about specific numbers if the committee wants to discuss the need for new school facilities?
We can certainly have available next week on the 29th. The average cost of a new high school, you might recall Mr. Barcone did share a comment at the last meeting that price tag's about $80 million, but we'll have our facilities group provide you with an average number as well as the average cost to build an elementary school and the associated student enrollment capacity with each cost.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle, this is Kurt Hobbs. Could we also get an enrollment number based on no variances? Meaning, can we look at what the enrollment of each school, high school and elementary schools would be if we take away all the variances that each school has?
This is Jan. I don't know that we can do that legally.
Hey, Kirk, Mike Burrell, I was just curious at the reason behind your request for the enrollment.
Well, Michelle, are you there?
Here, I'll mention to the committee we should probably share requests for future agenda items or other information for that particular agenda item in our agenda, just because we have a separate agenda item for those types of requests.
Okay, I'm not clear about what you just said.
What I'm saying is, for the committee, we want to be mindful that requests for future agenda items or other information that's not associated with the particular agenda item that we're discussing would be later on in the agenda, and it's specifically agenda item number 11.
Oh, okay. So I can wait and talk about it then.
Are there any comments or discussion points related to bond authorization amounts, tax rates, M&O override percentages, tax rates, or looking at a ballot question for both, one or neither? That's, I think, where the committee wanted to have the opportunity to get a feel for where the committee was standing based on the comment made at the last meeting.
This is Melissa. I just wanted to clarify. So when you're looking at the major, the bond program scenarios, major assumptions, and you have the amount from 75 million to 250 million, are you assuming that the 250 million is a comprehensive bond and not just a critical needs bond then?
That is correct. So The approach with this agenda item is you have information from ADM Group that identifies priorities and critical projects over certain periods of time by school. And that information could be used to craft a critical needs bond. You also have dollar amounts related to transportation needs, technology needs. We know specifically computers and the technology needs that Mr. Gay and Mr. Triggebaugh talked about have to be broken out separately in a bond authorization, because the bonds that are sold related to those purchases have to be rapidly amortized because of the useful life of the equipment that the bond is funding. So with that, let's say you had a $125 million bond as an example. In the scenarios that Mr. Lundberg's put together, I believe he's got embedded in that $27 million of FF&E, technology equipment as an example. So buses and transportation needs, buses that are eligible for bond purchase would come out of the difference, and you can start adding up and say, okay, we've got X amount for technology, transportation, priority projects based on ADM Group's work. That could be the basis of a critical needs bond. Then you start adding on, well, new construction, a high school costs $80 million, an elementary school costs 20, and we'll bring those numbers back to you next week. That's how you would then say, okay, that's how we move from critical needs to comprehensive. And so the snapshots, we're always mindful of our debt limit and our assessed valuation. We've just provided a wide range of dollar amounts to help the committee look at tax rates, to look at them in conjunction with a maintenance and operations override. I know Mr. Guttridge is conscious of that and has asked that question, but that's why we've provided the spectrum of amounts.
Michelle, I've got a quick question for you. I'm not sure if I understood or if I'm jumping to a conclusion here. It sounded like you indicated that the technology stuff, because it's going to be because the lifespan of the technology is shorter, that those would go on a different kind of bond, a short duration bond. Does that imply that would be a separate voting item on a ballot, or would that still be related to the big bond authorization, yay or nay, from the voters?
Thank you for that question. I should clarify my comment. It's all within the same bond. I'll use our current bond, the 2012 bond, as an example. The full authorization was $180,000. One of the categories was for technology within that $180 million. However, the dollar amount that was associated with that line item, we knew that when portions of that line item were included in a bond sale, that those particular bonds in that bond sale had to have a shorter payback period, because the statute says the payback period for the debt cannot exceed the useful life of the item being purchased.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's kind of what I thought, but for some reason I thought maybe things had changed, and that's why you were suggesting, or at least the way I interpreted it, it might be broken out as a separate item. So, okay, that clarifies everything.
Thank you. And just to add the point why I said I commented on it, Mr. Lundberg included in his analysis an amount that would have a shorter amortization period. And that's what I was trying to convey with my comment, not that it would be separate.
To piggyback on that question, if a district goes out for an override though, and a bond in the same year, those are listed separately on an election ballot, correct?
That is correct.
This is Annette McCarty again. Regarding the maintenance and operations override, the salaries has been impacted by Prop 206, I believe, is the one that moved the minimum wage and caused a bunch of compression in the district. When was that passed, and what impact does that have on that salary line item?
Thank you for that question. Prop 206 went into effect in 2017. And if memory serves me correctly, at that point in time, the minimum wage was, I believe it was $8.10 an hour. And what the proposition required was that the minimum wage would increase over several years to ultimately be $12 an hour effective January 2020. So that had two outcomes for the district. The first is we had to fund that increase, that hourly increase, and that had a budget impact of anywhere from roughly $450,000 to $500,000 a year from our M&O budget. But then secondly, it created compression for employees where in the past there would have been a spread of several dollars between a supervisor and a direct report with their hourly wage. And so with Prop 206, with the minimum wage increasing over 3 years to $12, you now have employee groups where there used to be a significant spread based on perhaps duty and requirements related to the job, and now they're much closer. And also, again, the supervisor compared to the direct report. So there would be a significant cost, several $1 million for the district to put that spread back in place that once existed in the salary schedule before Prop 206. Are there any other questions?
I'm just going to renew, this is Mike Burrell again, just going to renew my comment about just kind of getting a feeler where everybody is with regard to one or both. If it's a majority that we're not going for one or we're going for both, I was just kind of curious to get that gauge. And that's why I asked about it last time. Would just like to hear on how people feel about that, because if, again, I would love to spend the most time on what it is that is the priority or what we plan to do as a group, if we are able to determine that through some sort of straw poll or whatever you guys wish to call that. But again, to kind of see where we're headed and the direction so that we can focus our attention onto our greatest needs. And if it is both, then great, then nothing hurt. But I just like to kind of see and gauge where everybody is, if everyone is okay with that.
Do you want us to type it in the chat box?
It can't be chatted. We can't chat during this. It needs to be, I think, stated, I believe, if I'm correct.
That's correct. This is a public meeting. Thank you.
What are your feelings, Mike?
I would love to sit here and be honest and say, excuse me, I'm gonna be honest, but love to say go for both. But I think the climate in which it is, and we have so many critical needs. Bottom line is we're chasing our tail here. We are chasing the problem of being underfunded as an educational institution across the board statewide. We are just not getting enough funds. So we chase our tail here a little bit. I think the M&O, I think the people, the persons, the programs, all of those things are our priority. And I think if we try to go to both, gather both, I think we're going to miss out on the opportunity to get one of them passed. I'm personally right now just leaning towards the M&O, concerned about the community, the backlash that might occur if we are asking for monies from people, an increase in their taxes when we are getting a lot of people on unemployment who are struggling. And then you go out there with kind of, hey, hat in hand, we still need your help. I don't think it serves our best interest at this time to do both.
Guys, I'm kind of willing to weigh in here for just a minute. I think there is a slim chance that you could get both on the ballot, and you could get a lot of support. But the trade-off is it can't be a tax increase. It's because of the current economic conditions and a whole bunch of other reasons. Anything that comes across as a tax increase, be it a single bond, be it the override, or be it a combination of the two, will fail. It will fail.
This is Ray Connolly, and I would like to concur with what Mr. Guttridge just said. I think if it's remaining the same, we might have a chance. We know that we do need the M&O passed for sure, but it's just critical that people understand that This is nothing new. This is just continuing with what we already have and what we continue to need. And perhaps we look at, I don't know if we can look at a bridge to where it's a shorter amount of time so that we can then go in a shorter amount of time to ask for an increase. I don't know. Just some thoughts.
Somebody might need to mute their mic. Not sure who it is. There we go. This is Annette. I agreed at this point in time that if we could continue with our maintenance and operations override number, I'd like to see that, especially based on that 2017 Prop 206 has put us in. So if it's viewed as a continuation, then that would be good. And on the bond, I'd like to just spread out all of the information on my dining room table because there's so much information on the critical needs, high priority, low priority. The great thing that I did notice in most of the cases, the tax rate was going down, and I think that that's a huge win for our community, and that's due to the population increase of Peoria from 1996 going from 75,000 people to today being over 175,000 people, that we are able to spread that that total bond amount across more people. And that may be a win for the school district and our taxpayers.
This is Jan. I think I kind of said what I needed to say last week, but I'll repeat it. I would go for a critical needs bond plus the technology money and maybe even beef that up a little, because I do think that distance learning is going to stay with us. And so I would go for that plus the maintenance of the override.
Hi, everyone. This is Patty. I'm almost exactly where Jan and Rick and Annette are at. I would go for both a bond and an override. I would do the maintenance of the override at the current 13%. And then I would also look for the bond to not be higher than our current bond is. Again, I don't want to increase taxes to anyone. And yes, exactly what Jan was talking about with critical needs and technology. But as long as it doesn't go over the current bond amount.
This is Hobbs. I agree with what Jan had offered, but and Rick and the rest of you have offered. I guess with regard to the technology piece, I would like to see, how much that would increase a critical needs bond. What that final number would be before I would say 100% yes to that. But I think that we should go out for both.
Guys, I would just comment that I am not sure that if we look at what I believe are probably truly critical bond needs, and being on the 2018 bond committee, I believe we have absolutely critical needs, safety and health issues that need to be addressed. So you've got to have a minimum level of bonding. And if we're now adding technology to it and transportation to it and whatever else, if you're going to have a net neutral tax scenario, I don't know how you get 13% added to it as well. Now, maybe there's been enough growth and enough distribution of the taxpayers to make that happen, but that's the kind of detailed information I think we have to have before we can make that call. And I am, I'm probably a little on the opposite side of the spectrum from you guys in that I think the bond is more critical than the override stuff is. And I can tell you that I believe this to be the case historically. Bonds are easier to pass than overrides are. So if the emphasis is on the bond and the override is a little bit less, you probably stand a better chance of it passing.
This is Michelle. I'm going to add a couple of comments if I may. You'll see as you look at the materials from Stiefel that because of the assessed valuation growth in our district, that we do have an opportunity to see a combined tax rate going down. And so we'll look at that in depth next time we meet. Secondly, it is important to remember that we're in year 5 of a 7-year M&O override, meaning if we don't renew it in November of 2020, in fiscal year 2022, we will start cutting our budget. And so basically the 27.8 million that we have has to be phased out. We would have to cut 9 million in fiscal year 2022, another 18 million the following year, and then basically the year after that, the override's completely gone. So there would be a significant impact on our district if we had to remove that much funding, just for the committee to be reminded of that. We'll have more discussion next time we meet. As I said, the majority of the meeting will be allocated to the continuation of this agenda item, and the committee members will have had the opportunity to study the materials from this week as well as any additional materials that we send. So to honor the committee's time, are we okay to move on to the next agenda item? And that would, thank you, that would be public comment. We did have 2 community members submit public comment, and Marcy Watson will read those comments at this time. A reminder to the committee, public comment cannot be responded to. It's simply public comment, and it is subject to the 3 minutes. So I can start my timer, and Mrs. Watson, if you would like to begin reading those 2 comments, please.
Yes, Michelle, this is Marcy. Can you hear me?
If you could speak a little closer to the microphone, you're a bit faint. Thank you.
How about this? Can you hear me better now?
Can the committee hear Marcy?
I can.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hear you.
I can hear. Okay, great. As Michelle mentioned, we received 2 public comments. The first one is from April Plonsky addressing Northern high schools, and her comment is, please address the overpopulation of PUSD's high schools. This has become a natural safety concern. Further, the cost of transportation to existing overpopulated high schools remains a burden on the district and its taxpayers. The second comment comes from Marilyn Strate addressing school funding. I see thousands of homes being built in North Peoria and no schools to support them. Is there any way to get the builders/developers to fund the schools needed to support the families in the new homes they are building? I am retired and fully support any bond funding measure for our schools. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much. We'll move on now to agenda item number 10, which is revisit prior agenda items. Would the committee like to revisit a prior agenda item? Okay, hearing no requests, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is number 11. And this is our opportunity to request additional information and future agenda items. There was also a request for a status update on what we have provided based on prior requests. And Robert, if you could please pull up that reference document and enlarge it, we can refresh the team's memory, the committee's memory on what we have. There were several requests for governing board input on priorities, which I've noted. We do have a Citizens Advisory Committee update tomorrow night with the governing board, and that will be noted again as part of the presentation. If we go to the second bullet point, please. We did have our facility utilization capital outlay presentation on the 15th, as well as applied economics. We did share out on the 26th that we did add additional places on the district's website for the public to access our meeting materials. And also now that we're in the virtual format, we're recording and placing those meetings on our YouTube channel website. We do have a couple of open items related to transportation that we will bring back. There was a question on policy and ADE guidelines. I've had our internal auditor help me, and I have a comprehensive set of handouts for you next time we meet. So that will augment what was presented on the 26th. We had a presentation on how to read a tax bill and the state aid credit on the tax bill. Today we did augment information from March 10th related to our override, and we'll be bringing back both the override and bond agenda items next time we meet. There is an open item on priority list from schools. It wasn't clear from the committee if you were still wanting that now that we've provided the information from ADM Group. So the committee can certainly speak to that in a few minutes. Next time we meet, I'll provide the information related to all-day kindergarten that was previously requested for Mrs. Briggs. We do have pending a charter school funding presentation that we'll add within our next 3 meetings. And it looks like I just might have lost my screen. Let's see if I can get back to it. So Robert, let's see if I can do that. All right, thank you. And then if we go to the next page, please. We'll add the funding for half-day kinder or half FTE. I do have the historical information related to when that changed. That will be next time we meet, as well as we did present on arts and music requirements on February 26th. And then again today and next week, we'll talk more about the override categories and total expenditures. We did previously provide information on the 2005 bond, as well as future bond projects that we have in our current bond. Mr. Duguid will provide information on the wellness requirements next time we meet. We have that ready to go. We do have pending still information on social workers that we will bring back within the next couple of meetings. You did have the technology presentation from Mr. Gay and his team today. And so that's what we had on the docket to provide you with the status update. And it does sound like the committee may have additional items. Would you like to add those at this time?
I kind of want to ask Mr. Duguid, this is Jan, who is likely on the task force for the fall, correct? Is he still there?
Oh, I'm still here.
Okay, so my question is, I would like to see some data regarding from all stakeholders, from parents, from students, from teachers, about how distance learning is going. And let me just give you a little bit of background from where I sit as a teacher having to do this. I know that I am not a distance learning teacher. I kind of suck at it, but there are parts that I'm really good at, but I don't know how other teachers feel. I do know how my teaching partner feels, and I do know how some of my kids are doing, but I don't have that overall kind of data. And I think if we're going to talk about programming in the fall, and even let's just say, whether we can free up space at a high school using distance learning, I'd kind of like to know if we're collecting that kind of data, like from parents, how's it going, what they like, what they don't like, from students, how's it going, what they don't like, how teachers doing. And just from that perspective, and maybe we can get some good information about how to move forward.
Point of order for this committee and the scope of the committee's purpose. A report on distance learning can be compiled, but when it comes to facility utilization and next steps, that is not within the current scope of the committee. Just to comment on that from a point of order perspective.
I just wanted to know if that is pieces of information he's collecting with his task force over there.
A question for next, this is Annette, I'm sorry. A question for next time for information possibly. We've talked regarding the facility utilization and seeing that we do have some elementaries that are stated as being underutilized. I know that there's all this state statute around closing schools, but is there a way to just take a breath and mothball a school or two and combine those members into one of the nearby, you know, they're all within a mile when we were building schools in the 70s. Is there a loophole to mothball? I guess is my legal question.
So is your request statutory requirements to take a school out of service for a period of time?
You said it much better than I did, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you for your request.
Michelle, I have a question. This is Kirk Hobbs. I misspoke earlier about my interest in having variance data. And so what I was asking for was, obviously we have a lot of schools that are, you know, that according to that variance report, the utilization report, that are at 90% or higher as far as utilization. And so for us to and I think there's a lot of interest in the community based on the questions and even within this committee regarding the need for additional facilities, building a high school up north and maybe even a elementary school up north. So I'd like to have data that would provide to us, maybe specifically to those schools that are 90% or higher in utilization, how many out of district variances exist within each of those schools? Just so we get a picture of really what is, if we just consider just the kids within our district, what would the enrollment look like?
Thank you. Are there any other requests?
Hi, Michelle, this is Patty. I believe there was a request from one of the items. I had requested a prioritization of schools, and Annette had added that we would use the facility. Based on today's report that shows each of the school's needs, I believe that item can be said that it's been met during this meeting, if that helps.
Thank you. Are there any other requests?
Michelle, I would like to kind of second Mr. Hobbs's request. I think if we're going to talk about opening and or closing schools, it would be nice to have a baseline that says if every kid in PUSD stayed in their local district, you know, if the kids that go to Altaloma stay at Altaloma, they don't go up to Vistancia or they don't go over to Paseo Verde or one of the other schools. That seems to me like that would be good baseline data for us to have. If we're going to get into a discussion about cost savings by mothballing or closing a school, or where or how we might adjust district boundaries, you know, one of the things that came to mind, I looked at the utilization data, and Centennial happens to be really overcrowded, and Cactus is not. And you know, perhaps a subtle change in the attendance boundaries could balance that out. And I think that's critical data for us to be taking a look at.
The request for enrollment, a lot of that information is available through the applied economics presentation, and we can provide that additional piece. I just want to remind the committee of the committee scope. And I suspect that a secondary committee will need to be formed to fully look at the facility utilization capacity report, as well as some of the things that have been discussed. So I just want to remind the committee that the scope does not include closing schools and those types of activities. But the requests have been noted. Are there any other requests? All right, well then I believe that's going to bring us to agenda item number 12, which is adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
Who made that motion, please? I'm sorry, who made the motion, please?
Sorry, Michelle, this is Rick. I move we adjourn the committee for today.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Patty, a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.